Welcome to the book of Obadiah. Just a short book. Seems to be insignificant in the Old Testament. In fact, Obadiah is the smallest book in all of the Old Testament. It only has 21 verses. It's never ever quoted, not one single time in the New Testament. And yet its message is a very important message concerning prophetic scriptures and even fulfillment of things in the end times. Nothing's known about the prophet Obadiah. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the background because we don't have a lot of background. His name means a servant of the Lord or servant of Jehovah. And there are several men in the Old Testament that had that same name. There's been great diversity of opinion as to who this person is and to the time in which he wrote. There is anger, enmity, war between the Edomites and the Israelites from the time of Jacob and Esau all through the Old Testament era. And so exactly when to place this, we don't know for sure. There's just a persistent, as it were, unrest between these two nations. And to try to give it an exact time is very, very difficult to do. I have my opinion, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. But there's been people have thought that this book could have been written at any time over a period of at least 600 years. Probably Obadiah was a prophet living before the Babylonian exile, and he saw what was going to happen with Edom and their attitude, their spirit of hatred toward Israel and Judah, and he saw that and he recorded it. If we look, it's an interesting thing to compare the book of Obadiah to parts of Jeremiah, and I'd like you to turn in your Bible to Jeremiah chapter 49. And I just want to point this out to you. I'm not going to spend a long time on this, but you can compare it yourself. And it gives us, it raises some questions, I guess, for us. Jeremiah chapter 49, and the verses that I'm in reference to are really verses 7 through 22. And it says in verse 7, concerning Edom, this is what the Lord Almighty says. If you look at Obadiah 1, now there's not chapters in Obadiah, so when I say 1, I mean verse 1. The vision of Obadiah, this is what the sovereign Lord says about Edom. And so we have a definite comparison there. The verse goes on in Jeremiah, is there no longer wisdom in Teman? Has counsel perished from the prudent? Has their wisdom decayed? Turn and flee, hide in deep caves, you who live in Dedan, for I will bring disaster on Esau, and I will punish him. If you look just in part at verse 3, the pride of Obadiah now, verse 3, the pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts and the rocks and make your home on the heights and say to yourselves, who can bring us down to the ground? There's a comparison there. Verse 5 in Obadiah. If thieves come to you, if robbers in the night, oh, what a disaster awaits you. Would they not steal only as much as they wanted? If grape pickers came to you, would they not leave you a few grapes? If you look at Jeremiah 49, and then verse 9, if grape pickers came to you, would they not leave a few grapes? If thieves came during the night, would they not steal only as much as they wanted? And so we have this strong parallel between them. Drop down to Jeremiah 49 and 14. I have heard a message from the Lord. An envoy was sent to the nations to say, assemble yourselves to attack it. Rise up for battle. If you look at Obadiah 1, The vision of Obadiah, this is what the sovereign Lord says: "We have heard a message from the Lord. An envoy was sent to the nations. Rise up and let us go to her for battle." And so if you look at Jeremiah 49, verse 16, compares to Obadiah 5. Part of it actually deals with Obadiah 4 as well. And so there is a strong comparison between what Obadiah wrote and what Jeremiah wrote. Now we know that Jeremiah was pre-exilic and then lived into the exile time. So he saw the exile take place. And so the question becomes, I guess there's a series of questions. Did Jeremiah write his prophecy, and did Obadiah, we would use the word plagiarize today, I guess, but did he lean heavily on Jeremiah's earlier prophecy? Did Jeremiah and Obadiah use a common third source that we do not have available to us? Or did Obadiah influence Jeremiah? And my feeling is that Obadiah probably influenced Jeremiah, that Jeremiah goes into the exile, lives into the exile, but Obadiah most likely was before the exile. So with that behind us, that comparison, Hosea treats, if you remember, Hosea, when we studied the book, Hosea treats the love of God for Israel as his main theme. Amos speaks of the righteousness of the Lord. Joel speaks of the day of the Lord. Obadiah turns his attention at this point away from the people of God per se and directed at the cousins of the people of God, the Edomites. And so this is about the doom of Edom. It's interesting when we look at the prophets. Some of the prophets are prophesying primarily to the northern kingdom, some primarily to the southern kingdom. Many of them mention many other kingdoms that are around, but their primary focus is north or south. Jonah is going to focus primarily on the Ninevites, although the point of the book is more about Jonah even than the Ninevites. But Obadiah focuses almost exclusively on the nation of Edom. And then at the end of the book, we're going to see that he turns his attention back to Israel. One could say that there are three parts of the book. The first part is verse 1, a message to Edom's neighbors. The second part is verses 2 to 16, a message to Edom. And then the third part is the end of the book, which is the message to the Jewish people as a whole. I guess that works as good as anything for an outline. And I'm going to break it down a little bit more as we go through this. But the primary issue is that the Edomites, who are the cousins, the descendants of Esau, the brother to Jacob, are ridiculing, mocking, gloating in Judah's destruction, and God is going to judge the nation of Edom. In many ways, just like in Esau, we see kind of a representation of the flesh. In Edom certainly well typifies the flesh and its desire for anything other than the things of the Lord God. And so in that aspect, we certainly have spiritual application to this. And so the chapter begins. The vision of Obadiah. Understand, this is a supernatural revelation. This is a divine vision that came to this servant of the Lord. And it is a national message that is being given to him, and it concerns the nation of Edom. It says, this is what the sovereign Lord says about Edom. Edom is basically the same word as the word Esau, which is the word red, which is a reference probably to Esau's complexion and hair. And then the message to Edom's neighbors. we have heard a message from the Lord. An envoy was sent to the nations to say, rise up, let us go against her for battle. So this vision comes to Obadiah, and he sees a messenger or an envoy, as it were, and he hears the message, and it is a supernatural revelation granted to Obadiah that the Lord has sent a messenger among the nations. And God is making this specifically and directly known, that he is stirring up the nations against the people of Edom. So then we move on, and we have to ask the question, why? Why is God doing this? Why is God's wrath being poured out upon the nation of Israel? And Obadiah is very specific with us of what was going on in that day. Now again, I believe that Obadiah is seeing it before it happened. There are those liberal interpreters of Scripture that never give credit to God for knowing beforehand what's going to happen on the earth. Those people have to give a late date to Obadiah, and they have to say Obadiah is really looking back and seeing what happened and recording it and saying there's the cause and there's the effect. But no, this is a supernatural vision given to Obadiah before the Babylonian captivity of the Judah of the southern kingdom. And so Obadiah gives the reason as he begins this, and the reason for judgment on Edom is pride. Pride leads to Edom's downfall. Interesting. It's a New Testament principle. Pride goeth before a fall in the King James Version. So verses 3 and 4 are talking to us about pride and the fall of Edom. Look at verse 3. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rock and make your home on the heights. You say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground? Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, says the Lord. So what causes the fall of Edom? Well, their pride, their unbearable pride. Edom's pride and conceit were nourished by the fact that this land that they lived in was a impenetrable land, as it were. Understand that where they lived was in the area of modern-day Petra. Now, we all know Petra from the movies, and that the city, the capital city, Petra of Edom, was in a narrow valley, and the city was carved into rock. And so it was just impenetrable for most parts. And it was Edom's pride that brought him down as a result of that. His high mountain fortresses, as it were. And literally, Edom dwelt in the clefts of the rock. And for the land of Eden, even outside of Petra, is rock mountains. And Mount Seir is where the cave dwellers had lived in ancient times. The original dwellers in this land were a people known as the Horites, and you can read about them in Genesis 14 and again in Deuteronomy 2. But in particular in Deuteronomy 2 and verse 12, it tells us that the Edomites conquered the Horites and moved into their land. So the original Horites lived in this area, but the Edomites moved into this, and Edom had a prideful, uppity, haughty spirit because of that. Because Edom believed they were invincible and they were impregnable. So he thought, no one can bring us down, no one can attack us, and we have a lofty habitation, as it were, is what's being said here. And Edom sees themselves as like if living in Alaska, bald eagles build their nests high up on cliffs, on the side of a cliff, and nothing and no one can get to them and to their eggs, generally speaking. And that's exactly the imagery that's being used here. Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, high, high up, from there I will bring you down. And so God assures Edom that though he believes he's an eagle, and that he has set his abode in the stars, as it were, that no one can reach, God can reach. And God can bring him down. And so we have Edom thinking, we're untouchable. And God pronouncing, you're touchable. From there, I will bring you down, declares the Lord. So Edom may be inaccessible to man. Edom is not inaccessible to God. How often in this life have we looked at strongholds among humanity? Whether it's a dictator or a fascist, or whether it's a terrorist group, or maybe just a strong political persuasion, and we look at that and we think, this can never end. This will never stop. There's nothing that can prevent this from happening. But everything is touchable by God. God is the ruler of this world. God is in control. And we must never forget that. Now we move on, and we see the destruction that is being pronounced upon Edom in verses 5 through 9. And let me just read that. It says, if thieves come to you, if robbers in the night, oh, what a disaster awaits you. Would they not steal only as much as they wanted? If grape pickers came to you, would they not leave a few grapes? But oh, how Esau will be ransacked, his hidden treasures pillaged. All his allies will force you to the border. Your friends will deceive and overpower you. Those who eat your bread will set a trap for you, but you will not detect it. In that day, declares the Lord, I will destroy the wise men of Edom, men of understanding in the mountains of Esau. Your warriors, O Teman, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountains will be cut down in the slaughter. And so Edom is going to be destroyed, yet Edom trusted in themselves. They trusted in the rocks around them. They trusted in their natural fortress, as it were. They trusted in Petra. They trusted in their wealth. They trusted in their allies. They trusted in their wisdom, and they trusted in their warriors. I'm going to show you all of that in a second. But their pride, the pride of living in Petra, the wealth that they had attained. Where did they get that wealth? I'll explain that in a moment. Their allies that were around them. The wisdom. What's up with Edom and wisdom, okay? And then their warriors. And who were those warriors? Where did they come from? Well, first of all, let me say this. That if you study this on your own, and I hope that you do, you're going to discover that there's a lot of reference to the Idumeans. The Idumeans and the Edomites are the same people. Edom, for the most part, was on the other side of the sea of the Dead Sea. We would consider it the other side of the Jordan, except that they're further south, okay? So they're on the other side of the Dead Sea and south of the Dead Sea. That's where Edom had their territory. And then when Judah was captured and carried into captivity by the Babylonians, 605 to 586 is when the transfer of people took place. The Edomites moved into southern Judah and became known as Idumeans. And so the Edomites and the Idumeans are essentially the same people. This is a pronouncement of destruction upon all of the Edomites and Idumeans all put together. So the prophet speaks and he says, wow, if robbers were to come along and break in at night, they would only steal what they could carry away. That's all they would take. When grape gatherers sneak into a vineyard in the nighttime, what are they going to take? Well, they're going to take as much as they can, but they can't take everything. They're going to leave some gleanings at least. But here, the vineyard is left completely bare. Unlike thieves and robbers, who only take a portion, they take everything. Oh, what a disaster awaits you. Would they not steal only as much as they wanted? But if grape pickers came, they would take a few things. Oh, how Esau will be ransacked. It seems to me that Obadiah is amazed at the destruction of the land. He's amazed at how destitute the land is going to be left. He is surprised and amazed. But how, verse 6, but how Esau will be ransacked. Oh, how they are going to be ransacked. The plundered condition is amazing to Obadiah. And then it says that the enemy is going to not only steal everything that's there that they can find, but then they are going to ransack and pillage, and they are going to find the hidden treasures. But how Esau will be ransacked, his hidden treasures will be pillaged. Wow, so we have a destruction of the Edomites that is deep, okay, to the very most hidden resources. Imagine if somebody had gold or silver and they had it hidden in the ground. This basically is saying that when you are pillaged, every one of your treasures is going to be discovered and it's going to be destroyed. Now, the capital city of Petra was a great market of the Syrian and Arabian trade, where many costly articles were treasured. The people, the Edomites, had money, and they relished in expensive things, and therefore the trade caravans from Syria and from Arabian territories would come into Petra, and there they would buy and sell. And it's telling us even that is going to be looted, all of your hidden treasures. And then verse 7, all your allies, even your friends, are going to gang up against you as a recompense for your treatment of the Jewish people, for your treatment of the southern kingdom in particular. And when the southern kingdom was driven out, the Edomites cherished that event and took opportunity to move in to where the Jewish people were moved out of. And so they had enjoyed the bounty. They had enjoyed luxury. They had enjoyed so many things. And now even their friends are going to deceive them, overpower them. Those who eat your bread, those who sat at your dinner table, those with whom you had fellowship, they are going to set a trap for you, and you're not even going to see it coming. You will not detect it. And so Edom's downfall was ultimately going to be brought about by their friends. In that day, declares the Lord, will I not destroy the wise men of Edom? So what makes them such wise men? Well, the interesting thing was that because of their wealth and because of their trade with the Syrians and with the Arabians, Esau or Edom became known as a group of very wise people, a people of discernment, a people of wisdom, a people of knowledge and understanding. And so here we find out that as wise as they are, their wisdom is going down, and they are going down with it. Because of they had such communications with the traders that came through. And so the Syrians, the Arabians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, because they were coming from the north to the south, from the south to the north, from the east to the west, and because of that, they literally had communication with relatively the whole known world at that particular time. And in fact, there were caravans that went through Petra that came from Europe and India. Edom had gained enviable reputation for their wisdom and their learning that came from all of these different ethnicities and areas. Now, wisdom is withdrawn. The wise and the powerful men of Teman will be destroyed because the Lord purposed to slaughter everyone in Edom. And Teman was a main city, an important city in Edom. And so when we come to verse 9, it says, "Your warriors, O Teman, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountains will be cut down in slaughter." And so we begin to we see that even their military might cannot stand up to the hand of God. A couple of things I need to say. If you remember the book of Job, in Job chapter 4 and verse 1, we are introduced to the first of Job's comforters, to use that term loosely. And the first comforter is a man by the name of Eliphaz, and Eliphaz is from Teman. So Job, you may not know this, you may, but Job actually lives in the area of Petra. This is the area that he comes from. Remember, Job was not a Jew. He was maybe a contemporary of Abraham, or maybe even lived a little before Abraham. Generally, he is placed somewhere between 21 and 2200 years BC, but lived in the area of Petra that at the time would have been possessed by the Horites before the Edomites came in. And so that became a main city, and it was the center of the Edomites' military. So the warriors of Teman are being referred to there. They will be terrified. And everyone in Esau's mountains, because the whole area is relatively a mountainous area, will be cut down in slaughter. So the mountains, the rocks, the valleys no longer provide protection for the nation of Edom, and God will destroy them. So then we move on. And we come to, by the way, one more word I just want to say about Teman. Teman, the city of Teman, is named after Esau's grandson, who is named Teman. So that's where that comes from. This all ties together around Esau and his descendants. We move on to the reasons for divine judgment being poured out upon the Edomites. And there's a list of reasons that are put together here. Let me read the verses. In verses 10 through 14, it says, "Because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed forever. On that day you stood aloof while strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, and you were like one of them. You should not look down on your brother in the day of his misfortune, nor rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor boast so much in the day of their trouble. You should not march through the gates of my people in the day of their disaster, nor look down on them in their calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives, nor hand over their survivors in the day of their trouble." So there is an edict, charges that are being brought against Edom, and the reason that God's judgment and wrath is going to be poured out upon this nation. And so we kind of have a written list of allegations, as it were, that comes along, and it describes for us the conditions that took place when Judah was invaded by King Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, King Nebuchadnezzar was king of Babylon. The Babylonians invaded Judah, the southern kingdom, beginning in 605 BC. In 605 and 604, the first wave of exiles was taken out of the land and over to Babylon. Those waves continued until the last wave in 586 BC. So from 605 to 586, the Babylonians were moving people out of Judah and exiling them to Babylon. We know that at the end of the 70 years of exile, and the 70 years goes from 605 to 536. At the end of that 70 years then, God allows a remnant to come back to the land, a remnant of Jews to leave Babylon and come back to the land. About 50,000 of them do that. But this portrays to us exactly what happened between the Edomites and the Jews who were being taken captive during this period of time. And so Edom really turned on their brother, the Jews, and they resorted to violence against them. Joel, when we were in Joel, we saw this verse, although we passed over it pretty rapidly, but I want to read it to you. Joel chapter 3 and verse 19, and it says, but Egypt will be desolate and Edom a desert waste because of the violence done to the people of Judah, in whose land they shed innocent blood. So even Amos speaks to this. We know that Amos very well could be the earliest of the minor prophets, definitely before the Babylonian captivity, and he speaks to the issue concerning the Edomites and their violence. But the fact is, the Edomites were violent toward the Jewish people all through their history. And so Edom had this violent spirit, and it was directed at Esau's twin brother Jacob and his descendants. And they were kind of, in a way, there were two parts to the punishment, or there are two parts to the punishment that are being laid out here in verse 10. And it says, because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. That's part one. And you will be destroyed forever. That's part two. And I really believe that these two episodes occurred at two different distinct times in history, and God still isn't done with the Edomites. He still isn't done with them. Even though they are destroyed and nobody has any idea who they are today, God still does. Basically, the Edomites were overcome by the Hasmonean dynasty. Now, the Hasmoneans, if you remember the Maccabees, in the 1st and 2nd century BC, a family of priests that rose up basically to fight against their conquerors that had come against them. It's that famous time in history where we have Antiochus IV Epiphanes and his takeover of the temple and setting up the abomination of desolation. The picture of that in the intertestamental time. And John Hyrcanus, one of the Hasmonean priests that we call Maccabees, was able to, for the most part, subdue the Edomites, and then ultimately the Edomites lost their national existence under the Romans. They were cut off forever as a nation, and though the land was going to be again populated, as we're going to see later on in verse 19 at the end of this prophecy, but nevertheless the Edomites as a people were cut off. Now, when the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, same people, okay? When the Chaldeans invaded Judah in the latter years, Edom, like the enemies of God's people, had assumed an attitude of hostility toward Judah. And Judah's goods were carried off. Her cities were entered into by force, and lots were cast. If you look at verse 11, it says, on the day you stood aloof, while strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates. and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. And so Edom is being portrayed as having the same attitude and spirit and actions as the Babylonians who came in. Turn back to Joel. Joel chapter, I think it's 3. Yes, chapter 3 and verse 3. Joel 3:3. And it says, they cast lots for my people and traded boys for prostitutes. They sold girls for wine that they might drink. So Joel is looking at this, the fall of the nation, but Obadiah is using the exact same language for how the Edomites treated them, casting lots for them. And so they cast their lots, and the population was sold into slavery. But Edom only was hostile for his own brothers, for their cousins, for their own relatives, and so Edom has a list of sins that are kind of listed against it, and they celebrated. Basically, they celebrated. They rejoiced at the fall and the injury of their brother. Take a look at what it says. Well, first of all, it says in verse 10, because of the violence against your brother. Then we come down to verse 12, and we have a list of 9 things here. You should not look down on your brother as you did in the day of his misfortune. You should not rejoice over the people of Judah as you did in the day of their destruction. Nor boast so much as you did in the day of their trouble. Number 3. Number 4, you should not march through their gates, the gates of my people, as you did in the day of their disaster. Number 5, you should not look down on them in their calamity, as you did in the day of their disaster. Number 6, I don't know where we are. Nor seize their wealth, as you did in the day of their disaster. You should wait at the crossroads. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives, nor hand over their survivors, as you did in the day of their disaster. And so, basically, Edom is being condemned because they rejoiced, and because of their insults, and because of their actions against their brothers, the Jews. Finally, the Edomites took their stand at the crossroad to cut off the retreat of those Jews that were trying to escape the Babylonians. And so there were some Jews from Judah, when the Babylonians moved in, that tried to run south, hide south, and make their way to Egypt. The Idumeans, or the Edomites, cut them off, captured them, and turned them back over to the Babylonians. That's how they treated their brother. So it was great insult in what they did, even preventing escapees. So they were compounding their anger, their distress, their hatred toward the descendants of their brother Jacob. Violence, verse 10. Hostile attitude, verse 11. Joy at Israel's calamity, verse 12. Boasting in Jacob's time of distress, verse 12. Spoiling of God's people, verse 13. Prevention of escape of the fugitives, verse 14. Betrayal of all of them into the hand of their enemy, verse 14. And the Lord will take account of this. And so we move then from this section of the reasons for the judgment into the day of the Lord. And even Obadiah speaks to us of the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is near. Now let me just pause there. Are we talking specifically about an immediate day, or are we talking about an imminent or ultimate day? Well, certainly there is an immediate aspect to this in that eventually, quite soon, the people were going to pay the price for this, but it wasn't exactly immediate, not in Obadiah's day, and not in even a short period of time after that. So maybe we could say this was an ultimate day when the Romans eventually would conquer them and destroy them, and they would be no more in the 1st century A.D., but actually we're looking here at an ultimate day, the day of the Lord. How do I know that? Because it says the day of the Lord is near for who? For all nations. And so we're talking about the great day of judgment for all nations and all people. God's reckoning, the day of the Lord is near. All of the prophets saw that day as near, actually imminent. It could come at any time. Always think of the prophets looking ahead, and they're seeing present disaster, and they're seeing the future day of the Lord. But if we see the present as a mountain and the future as a mountain, they could not see the distance between those mountains, the valley. That was the end of the Old Testament era and the church age. I remember one time I was in Alaska, and when I lived in Alaska, and there was a woman who was a tourist, and we were in Anchorage, and she was pointing to the north, and she said, "Which of those mountains is Denali?" And so I pointed out to her Mount Denali, which one was hers, and she looked at it and she said, "Well, that's the tallest mountain in North America, but it doesn't look any taller than the mountains that are right next to it." And I said to her, what you can't see from here is that the mountains that are of equal size right next to it are about 20 miles from here. Denali is 200 miles from here. She couldn't see the valley between the near mountains and the far mountain. So she had no idea what she was really seeing. It was the same way with the prophets. They saw their present day disaster, they saw the future day of the Lord, but they did not know the time period that was in between it, and they always referred to it as the day of the Lord is near. And so the day of the Lord was real, and it was going to come, and it is going to come, and it is going to be upon all nations. I kind of want to refer you to Jeremiah chapter 5. In this particular study, we're not looking at Jeremiah because that's not a minor prophet, it's a major prophet. But I want you to look at Jeremiah with me, chapter 25. And while I want to look at the later on in the chapter, I always have to begin earlier to just give you a little bit of context, okay? And in verse 15, it says, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me, take from my hand this cup filled with the wine of my wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. When they drink it, they will stagger and go mad because of the sword I will send among them." Now, if you drop down to verse 27, "Then tell them, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Drink, get drunk and vomit, and fall to rise no more because of the sword I will send among you." And now I want you to drop down to verse 30. "Now prophesy all these words against them, and say to them, the Lord will roar from on high. He will thunder from his holy dwelling, and roar mightily against his land. He will shout like those who tread the grapes, shout against all who live on the earth. The tumult will resound to the ends of the earth. For the Lord will bring charges against the nations. He will bring judgment on all mankind, and put the wicked to the sword, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Look, disaster is spreading from nation to nation. A mighty storm is rising from the ends of the earth." And so Jeremiah is looking ahead at this great and dreadful day that we saw in the book of Joel, that we see referenced throughout the prophets, and even Obadiah is talking to us about that day. So at that time of judgment, it's going to be in preparation for the establishment of the millennial kingdom. We're really looking at a fulfillment of this prophecy, the day of the Lord, that will take place ultimately during the tribulation time, and it will lead to the establishment of the Messianic kingdom. And during that time, the power of Edom will finally and completely be destroyed. That's what it's saying. The day of the Lord is near for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head, just as you drank on my holy hill, so all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and be as if they had never been. So God is pronouncing an ultimate judgment on the Edomites, that even though Edom was subdued in the years BC, ultimately destroyed in the 70s AD by the Romans, it seems that in the end times, and we're going to have a reference to that in Zechariah, in the end times, Edom is going to be raised up again in some form and ultimately destroyed by God. And so because of Edom's hatred, because of their evil, God is bringing ultimate judgment upon them. God says Edom is going to be blotted out as a nation. You know what? Other nations, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, they're restored and ultimately brought into the millennial blessing. We'll get to that in a different place. But the Edomites will not be restored and will not be brought into any sort of millennial blessing at all. Edom will have been utterly destroyed and be no more. Now, it is an interesting thing today that, to my knowledge, it is impossible to find anybody in all the world that claims to be a descendant of Esau. No one claims to be an Edomite. But just like the tribes of Israel that appear to be lost, God knows where all people are. God has not lost track of them. And so we come to the final verses of our book. Verses 15 and 16 has to do then with the day of the Lord is at hand. And verses 17 through 21 is the ultimate salvation of Israel and the Messianic kingdom. Let me read it. It says, "But on Mount Zion will be deliverance. It will be holy. And the house of Jacob will possess its inheritance. The house of Jacob will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. The house of Esau will be stubble, and they will set it on fire and consume it. There will be no survivors from the house of Esau. The Lord has spoken. People from the Negev will occupy the mountains of Esau, and people from the foothills will possess the land of the Philistines. They will occupy the fields of Ephraim and Samaria, and Benjamin will possess Gilead. This company of Israelite exiles who are in Canaan will possess the land as far as Zarephath. The exiles from Jerusalem who are in Sepharad will possess the towns of the Negev. Deliverers will go up on Mount Zion to govern the mountains of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's." So what is our final conclusion to our chapter here, to our prophecy? Well, it is that Israel is going to be saved. That is a common theme throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. Whereas Edom can only expect destruction, divine judgment, Israel awaits restoration, folks. Israel will be destroyed. As Paul said, "My heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved." And Paul goes on, he said that there's coming a day when the time of the Gentiles has been fulfilled and Israel will be saved. All Israel will be saved. And so Israel awaits that time of restoration. And it says, "But on Mount Zion will be deliverance." Jesus is going to descend upon the mount, and he will deliver it, and it will be holy. And Jesus will set up his 1,000-year reign on this earth, and he will rule from the Temple Mount. The house of Jacob will then possess their possessions. It says, and the house of Jacob will possess its inheritance. They have never possessed their inheritance. Not all the land that was promised to them and not all the blessings that were promised to them. They've never possessed it because of their own failings, because of their own sins, because of their own rebellion against God. But one day is coming when they will possess all of their possessions. They will occupy all of the territory, all of the land, and all of the blessings that have been given to them. And no longer will Israel's borders fall short of God's promise to them. For Israel, through the years, they have been attacked in every age, but now they are going to be the ones who are the instruments of bringing punishment upon Edom. Verse 18, the house of Jacob will be a fire, the house of Joseph a flame, the house of Esau will be stubble, and they will set it on fire and consume it. There will be no survivors from the house of Esau, the Lord has spoken. Look at Zechariah chapter 12 with me a moment. Zechariah chapter 12. Don't want to get too much into this because we're going to be getting into this later. But Zechariah chapter 12 and verse 6. This chapter is talking about the same subject, the enemies of Israel being destroyed. But I'm just going to pull out this one verse. And it says, on that day, I will make the leaders of Judah like a fire pot in a woodpile, like a flaming torch among the sheaves. They will consume right and left all the surrounding peoples, but Jerusalem will remain intact in her place. So Zechariah and Obadiah use the idea of a furnace or a fire and its destructive nature as a description of how Israel will be in judgment upon the nations that are around them. And then it goes on in verse 19. And it talks about the people from Negev. Negev is a Hebrew word, it means south. And it's the land south of the promised land. The people of the Negev will occupy the mountains of Esau. And so we have a prophecy that the Jewish people in the south will be moving into the land of Esau. Now, let me just remind you that the Edomites are underneath the Red Sea, and the Edomites are just above them on the southern end of Judah. And so we have here a promise that the land that Edom possessed and the land that the Edomites stole during the Babylonian captivity is going to be returned, and people from the Negev will occupy the mountains of Esau. The people will move back into their land that is rightfully theirs, and they will take over all the land of Esau. People from the foothills will possess the land of the Philistines. And so we have here an expanding of the kingdom into the rightful land that is theirs. Israel has been under attack almost from the beginning of time, really from the beginning of Israel, the beginning of Abraham, and to this very day, Israel is under attack. Now there is going to be a change that takes place. There's going to be, the Bible tells us, the reuniting of the northern and the southern kingdom into one united kingdom again. And the house of Jacob, the house of Joseph, the united kingdom, Ephraim, and Judah, and all Samaria and Judah, all these names that have been used for the divided kingdoms through the years are going to become a fire, and they will consume their enemies, and they will take for themselves the land that is Esau's, Mount Esau, and the lands to the west, and they will take the lands to the east, which is where the Philistines are. The Philistines along the Mediterranean have a Pentapolis. They have 5 cities over there that they possessed through much of the Old Testament. And it is in the land that God has promised to Israel. Israel will win that land back again. The territory of the northern kingdom will be restored and enjoyed. And Benjamin, who was always loyal to the Davidic dynasty, Benjamin went with Judah when there was the division, will expand east. So Benjamin is going to be rewarded, and it says they will. It says they will occupy in the fields of Ephraim and Samaria, and Benjamin will possess Gilead. Gilead is on the other side of the Jordan River and what we would call today northwest Jordan. And so if we were studying Ezekiel, I could show you the prophecy for how this is going to happen and when it's going to happen. But for now, Obadiah is just telling us that there's going to be an expansion for Benjamin, and Benjamin's land is going to go, Benjamin, who was so small, is going to be expanded across the Jordan and all the way to the Euphrates River. It says the company of Israelites exiles who are in Canaan will possess the land as far as the Zarephath. And so we have the fulfillment here of prophecies that have been throughout the Old Testament, but the land that's being referenced here is Zarephath or Phoenicia of ancient times and modern day Lebanon. If you remember, Tyre and Sidon sit up against the Mediterranean Sea north of the land of Israel. Between them are the modern diggings of this land and this area of Zarephath, and they will possess that land. And the exiles from Judah who are in Sepharad will possess the towns of the Negev. Now, I'm going to tell you that nobody really knows Sepharad. We don't have any knowledge of that. There's guesses. Everything out there is a guess. And so I'll throw in probably maybe the main guess would be people that have gone up into Asia Minor, Jews that have gone up into Asia Minor. But I'm going to tell you right now, nobody knows except this. They're exiles. They're exiles from Jerusalem. They've moved somewhere, and they're going to come back, and they're going to possess the towns of the south, really a reference to the promised land. Deliverers will go up on Mount Zion. And look at what they're going to do. They're going to go up, and they're going to govern. Jewish people are going to govern. And they're going to govern the mountains of Esau. But even though the Jews govern it, in this day, the kingdom is the Lord's. The kingdom is the Lord's. And so, to conclude, Obadiah in pre-exilic days sees the Spirit of God, by the Spirit of God, the final culmination of Edom's hatred for Israel, of Edom's vicious conduct for the people of God under Nebuchadnezzar and through the centuries. The prophet traces the sources of the attitude, pictures vividly the features of punishment upon God, punishment of God upon Edom, and for their attitudes, for their arrogance, for their speech, for their pride, for their actions. When is the time of the fulfillment of this prophecy? The fulfillment of the ruin of Edom foretold by Obadiah was begun by Nebuchadnezzar in the Chaldean period. Edom was eventually laid waste in Jeremiah 49 and Ezekiel 35. We read about that. But the Maccabees further subjugated him, and the Romans completely brought about Edom's ruin at the time that they destroyed the temple around 70 AD. So through the centuries, we hear nothing of Edom. In the end time, and before the gathering of the nations against Jerusalem in the war of Armageddon, Edom will once again be on the world scene. There is to be a revival of many nations. Luke 21:29 tells us that. Then Edom will experience to the full the divine wrath of God, bringing about their destruction, and the Lord Jesus Christ himself executing that judgment of God on Edom and on the allies of Edom. The wicked nations will be destroyed. Edom will be cut off. Israel will be restored from captivity and will possess all the land originally promised by God to Abraham, and the Lord will reign over all the earth. And we will reign with him. That's what's so exciting about this. We're going to be there to see this final ultimate reign. So Obadiah, tiny little book, but it's unique and it's important in its pronouncement against the brother of Jacob and his descendants, who has been so hateful toward the Jewish people through the centuries. God is the judge, and God will deliver his people. See you next time.